Joining us on Word now to discuss the implications of the visit by the French president to his Chinese counterpart is a broadcast journalist, Tetteh Kofi. Thank you so much for joining us on Word now.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, what would you consider are the key issues at stake in the current EU-China relationship, and how do they impact Europe's prosperity and security?
Okay. What Ursula von der Leyen has said is that China has moved alarmingly from a path of reform to a path of security and control, and reference the situation over Taiwan and so on. She's also been quite critical of the human rights record, as she says it, of the Chinese people. So as far as the EU is concerned, I think the EU is very concerned about the fact that China is increasingly adopting the center ground as the new superpower and world policeman. And clearly they're not happy with that. However, on the other hand, the volume of trade between the EU as a trading bloc and Beijing is 240 billion. This isn't something that you can, kind of wave a stick at and forget. Add to that the fact that Macron and von der Leyen were both in China, flanked by 60 top-level European businesses. And you can see that despite the saber-rattling, about the EU de-risking its relationship with China, they're still clearly very much open for business.
So how do you see the recent meetings between Europe leaders and President Xi Jinping impacting the EU stance towards China and its economic ties with the country?
Well, China's a huge country, and she has a massive strategic position in the world. Let's not forget also the fact that China's alliance with Russia has spawned this new special drawing rights, SDR currency position, which is actually a rival to the American dollar as the reserve currency of the world. Now, that currency is backed by the BRICS nations and possibly now Saudi Arabia. And so, as far as the status of China is concerned, this is undeniable. And of course, let's not forget that whenever the former colonies of most of the colonial powers, which are in the EU, that would be France, Germany, and others. Britain, of course, has left. China has been making huge inroads into Africa. So all of this makes the EU feel a little bit insecure and wanting to flex as much as it can to bring China back to heel so that we were at business as before. It's never going to happen. We have left those days behind, and we're all heading to a new future.
So what role in this regard do you see China playing in building peace, as discussed by President Macron, and how can the EU work with China to achieve this goal?
You see, I'm a journalist, and I'm led by the facts. The facts are simply this. Back in 1991, when the then Soviet Union fell apart and became Russia, there was, I believe, an unwritten but very clear agreement that NATO would not advance beyond Eastern Germany. Okay. Now, NATO has crept up and up and up. In the past few days, Finland has joined NATO. Finland has a border with Russia. Ukraine has a border with Russia. And if Finland joins NATO, there are moves now for Sweden also to join NATO. Now, under those circumstances, there is nobody in their right mind who would expect Russia to sit down, twiddle its thumbs, and watch an organization dedicated to the emasculation and control of Russia creep up to its borders. This goes back, I think I said in an earlier program, to the Monroe Doctrine, which says that every country has a right to spheres of influence. And once those spheres of influence are threatened, the country has a right to act. In fact, on the basis of this, the United States herself has invaded or involved itself in the internal affairs and politics of more than a dozen countries in Southern America. So, as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, I think that obviously China has made the statement that all members of the United Nations must respect sovereign borders. But, you know, politically, you would have to be tone deaf to expect Russia to sit down and do nothing about the intense provocation of having the one organization that's dedicated to its manipulation and control creeping up day by day onto its borders. So we'll have to watch, wait, and see. In my opinion, the situation is completely untenable. Everybody knows we can't afford a nuclear or a biological war. In fact, the Chinese have ruled both of those options out. So it means that at some stage, they have to get around the table and they have to find a solution that makes Russia, who is being pitched as the aggressor, feel sufficiently comfortable
Right.
to stand down its military forces.
Right. So you actually mentioned the nuclear or biological warfare. You know, what's
Right.
the significance of President Macron and President Xi agreeing that nuclear weapons should not be used in Russia's war in Ukraine? And how do you think this might impact the ongoing conflict?
Well, it's huge. It's important. And I'm sure you in your studios, me in West London, sit here and heave a huge sigh of relief because it is the one thing none of us can afford is nuclear conflict. So relief. But on the other hand, of course, what it means is that the tactical war is going to become more and more and more likely drawn out because it's going to become a war of attrition. And I'm really sorry to say that more Russians, more Ukrainians, more women and children are going to lose their lives.
Mm. Well, in light of recent events, how do you see the EU-China relationship evolving in the coming years, and what impact do you think this might have on the global economy and international relations, particularly?
Well, I think that when you've got a balance of trade, which is kind of certainly France's, is France buys three times as much as it sells to as it sells to China, and the EU as a bloc has such a massive trading relationship to China, they can't avoid each other. They need each other to survive. Then the next thing then becomes under what circumstances. Van der Leyen is talking about de-risking the relationship. So what she's saying is that, well, look, we got to be careful about the kind of technologies that we sell to China. We got to be careful about this of us giving them our tips and tricks on artificial intelligence, strategic things of that nature. But when it comes to the high margin, very lucrative businesses like selling of automobiles to China, I think that that is going to continue. But for the rest of the world, I mean, that fills Europe's coffers. The rest of the world, we want Ukraine to be at peace so that it can continue to grow wheat, produce fertilizer, and free up the global supply chains, which are now impacting poor countries, say in Africa and other parts of the world, a lot harder than is necessary. This is a war actually that Africa can't afford.
Africa really can't afford this kind of war. It's just like you said, really impacting the lives in the poorest of the poor in this world. Broadcast journalist from the United Kingdom, Tetteh Kofi, thank you so much for your keenness of insight always. Thank you.